The Waking Threshold, Part 1. The Chronology of Dread. Elias Vance's earliest memories were not of kindergarten or birthday parties. They were of a chilling, systemic failure of his own perception. They were the 3 years of nightmares that began precisely on his 6th birthday, a recurring trauma that always started the same way. A slow, agonizing process of cognitive dissociation. He would be lying in his small twin bed, the blue glow of his nightlight painting the ceiling, when the sense of Elias would begin to rise. It wasn't an out-of-body experience in the metaphysical sense. It was a feeling of his consciousness peeling away from its biological shell, floating just inches above his paralyzed body, detached but still terribly bound. From this vantage point, hovering near the ceiling fan, he could see everything. And everything meant two things. The first was the clock. It materialized on the wall opposite his bed, a stark, digital red display overlaying the pale floral wallpaper. It was always counting down, a silent, relentless march toward 0, 3 hours. The numbers never changed, never progressed. They simply existed, a fixed point of future dread, 3 hours of impending, unknown doom. The clock was a static promise. But the second sight was kinetic, dynamic, and terrifyingly real. Pressed against the outside of his second-story window, a man watched him. He was tall, gaunt, and possessed a shock of silver hair, even in Elias' young mind, the color of old ash. But the feature that branded itself onto Elias' memory was the scar. A jagged, thick line that started above his left eyebrow and vanished into his hairline, lending his face a permanently hostile symmetry. Every night, the man would stand there, illuminated by the distant street lamp, scratching at the glass with a long, dirty fingernail. A sound Elias could not hear but somehow felt in the marrow of his floating awareness. Scratch, scratch, scratch. By the age of 9, Elias was exhausted, thin, and prone to panic attacks, unable to distinguish the world of sleep from the world of waking. Finally, desperate, he detailed the man and the scar to his parents. His father, a reserved man of precise habits, went pale. His mother drew a sharp breath. "That's Art Finch, Elias," his father confirmed, the name dropping like a stone into a well. "An old business acquaintance. A dangerous man we cut ties with years ago." "How do you know about him?" "The nightmares," Elias whispered. "He's outside my window." The conversation was dismissed as a child's vivid imagination fueled by old overheard arguments. But 2 months later, the family abruptly sold their house and moved 3 states away to a quiet suburb where the trees were taller and the neighbors were strangers. On the first morning in the new house, Elias, still haunted, walked outside to inspect the ground beneath his new bedroom window. The lawn was freshly manicured, the soil soft. And there, pressed lightly into the dewdamp earth, were the faint but undeniable outlines of a large pair of worn leather boots. A man had stood outside his new room, exactly as he had dreamed. It was the first, chilling confirmation that his subconscious mind was not merely inventing fears, but intercepting threats. The years that followed only strengthened his belief in the prophetic nature of his sleep. He began to think of his nightmares not as psychological events, but as a kind of precognitive sensory organ. The second major incident occurred during a weekend college break at his friend Sam's dilapidated apartment complex. Elias was crashed out on a lumpy sectional when the dream hit. A sudden, violent shift from the quiet peace of normal sleep. He wasn't dissociating this time. He was trapped inside a sensory overload. He was standing on a pier, the air thick with salt and ozone, watching a colossal storm front roll in, not a weather system, but a living, breathing wall of black water that filled the sky. As the waves surged higher than the tallest buildings, a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the noise. A verbal alarm bell ripped straight from the fabric of the immediate future. TNHDYI. Song Ung and Dot. "Wake up, the surge is coming." The voice was gone, replaced instantly by a sound in the real world. The violent, undeniable roar of rushing water from the apartment directly above. Elias shot upright, adrenaline flooding his system. The apartment felt wrong. The air was charged, not with electricity, but with tension. The rushing water sound was deafening, the result of a pipe bursting in the unit upstairs. As Sam and their other roommate, Ben, stirred sleepily, Elias' eyes fixed on the bathroom door, which was ajar. It was a space that should have been dark, but a faint, uneven shadow moved behind the gap. Ignoring Sam's confused mutters, Elias lunged. He slammed the bathroom door open, his body acting before his mind could rationalize the danger. The intruder was already there, soaked from the ceiling leak above, standing hunched over with a crudely sawed length of PVC piping held like a weapon. The man, a petty thief Elias later learned, had climbed onto the balcony using the fire escape, been caught by the burst pipe, and was waiting in the dark to ambush the first person who checked the noise. The PVC pipe was aimed not at Elias, but at Sam's head, who was still blinking away sleep. The immediate, violent confrontation lasted seconds. Elias' blind momentum knocked the man off balance, sending the pipe clattering against the ceramic tile. Sam and Ben finally reacted, overwhelming the disoriented intruder until the police arrived. As Elias sat on the curb, shaking, the reality solidified. The precise synchronization of the dream's alarm phrase with the specific, unique sound of the burst pipe had pulled him from sleep just moments before the attacker made his move. His subconscious had processed the external acoustic threat, the pipe, and translated it into a metaphoric internal warning, the surge, with enough urgency to save them. The most profound, most terrifying validation, however, occurred a year later at his girlfriend Olivia's house. She lived in a large, old home in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. The kind of house where things simply didn't happen. Elias was sharing her bed when he slipped into a sequence of terrifying false awakenings. The first time, he woke up, completely paralyzed. Olivia was sleeping soundly beside him. The room was bathed in moonlight. But he was not alone. Whispers, thin as razor wire, began to leak from the corners of the room. They didn't speak of future events. They spoke of his deepest, most concealed insecurities. They named the mistakes he'd made, the lies he told himself, the private shames he kept locked away. They were voices of pure, personalized psychological sabotage. Then, a new detail appeared. A strip of light, thin and violently sharp, sliced across the darkened floor, originating from the crack beneath the bedroom door. It was an unnatural yellow, intensely bright, like a laser beam. He woke again. Same room, same paralysis. The whispers were louder now, taunting him with knowledge he hadn't even consciously processed. The moment he decided to quit his job, the secret of his friend Ben's gambling problem. He tried to move, to scream, to reach for Olivia, but his limbs were leaden weights. He stared at the floor. The yellow light was back, an identical, thin, sharp slice. He woke a third time. Panic became sheer terror. The whispers were now inside his head, forming full, complete sentences, dissecting his character flaws with clinical precision. And the light, the narrow, intense, unmistakable strip of blinding yellow, slicing across the rug, static and omnipresent. Finally, he woke for real. He gasped, sitting bolt upright in bed, covered in sweat. Olivia stirred next to him. Everything was silent for a moment, and then a strange, low metallic sound echoed from downstairs, followed by a muffled shout. Elias froze, staring at the bottom of the bedroom door. There it was, the light, an identical, narrow, intensely sharp strip of yellow that looked exactly, precisely like the horrifying detail that had punctuated his multiple dream states. It wasn't a product of his psychological terror. It was real. Before he could react, footsteps pounded on the stairs, and a voice, not a whisper, but a harsh command, yelled, "Police! Freeze!" A moment later, the bedroom door flew open. A pair of uniformed officers burst in, their duty flashlights cutting blinding white paths across the room, quickly followed by two nervous detectives. Downstairs, two armed burglars, one holding a silver object that turned out to be a knife, the other a heavy wrench, were being subdued and arrested. As the chaos subsided, Elias realized the truth. The intense yellow light he had seen in his dream, the specific hue, the specific angle, the specific narrowness, was the light from a tactical flashlight held at a low angle by the first officer who swept the downstairs hall, the beam escaping the living room and traveling up the stairs, barely visible beneath the bedroom door. His body was racked with deep, profound shivers. It wasn't just that he had a warning. It was that his mind had literally recreated a photographic detail of a future physical reality. A detail as specific as the color and shape of a narrow beam of light, and woven it into a complex psychological terror sequence, using it as an anchor to force him awake. His subconscious had not just predicted the threat, it had experienced and catalogued the sensory detail of the event before his conscious mind. This was the nexus. This was the thin boundary that his mind seemed uniquely capable of crossing. He spent the next month reading everything he could about precognition, lucid dreaming, and sleep paralysis, finally settling on a term he felt encompassed the terrifying synchronicity: the waking threshold. It wasn't a premonition of fate. It was the psychological moment where imminent, objective physical danger breaches the protective barriers of the sleeping mind, pulling a person from the unconscious realm into the conscious one, utilizing real-world sensory data yet to occur as the final, necessary trigger. Elias Vance now knew he wasn't crazy. He was a sentinel, constantly walking the razor's edge between a prophetic inner world and a constantly endangered outer one. And the constant reminder of that first nightmare, the terrifying face of Art Finch and the fixed, mocking promise of the countdown clock 3 hours, still hung in the air, waiting for the hour to strike. Part 2. The Tyranny of Foresight. Elias Vance was no longer living in the present. He existed in a state of perpetually deferred future. The waking threshold had become less of a phenomenon and more of a tyrannical lifestyle. After the near miss at Olivia's, Elias became obsessed, not with preventing future events. He knew he couldn't stop the forces of coincidence and malice, but with studying the moment of intersection itself. He started keeping meticulous records, a journal dedicated not to the events of his day, but to the precise mechanics of his sleep. He documented the type of threat, acoustic, visual, somatic, the trigger phrase or image, and the exact time gap between the dream's climax and the real-world occurrence. He learned that the warning window was always short, ranging from 30 seconds to a maximum of 3 minutes. It was enough time to move, to speak, or to brace himself, but never enough time to escape or plan thoroughly. His research led him to the only conclusion that made sense. The threshold was an early warning system, a biological sonar activated by extreme, non-random danger directed at him or his immediate vicinity. His obsession was isolating. Olivia, though patient and loving, struggled with Elias' increasing detachment. He would place his phone, recording audio, under his bed every night. He installed cheap motion sensors near every window, which he checked maniacally. He spent his days in the university library basement, poring over obscure neurological texts and forgotten accounts of collective consciousness. He needed to understand how his mind was accessing data that physically did not exist yet. One evening, while running a statistical analysis on the commonalities between his warnings, he hit a cold, chilling wall of fear. Every major incident, from the footsteps of Art Finch outside his childhood window to the tactical flashlight in Olivia's house, had occurred between 2:57 a.m. and 3 a.m. That 3-minute window, the final, ticking segment of the fixed 3-hour countdown he'd seen as a child, was the point of objective, physical breach. The clock 3 hours wasn't counting down to zero, but to the moment the danger became manifest, the moment the future slammed into the present. The terror was renewed by the realization that Art Finch, the man with the silver hair and the scar, was the foundation of all this dread. Finch had been a ghost for years, a threat Elias' parents had dismissed after the move. But Finch remained the only constant, the only entity tied to the recurring countdown. Elias finally confronted his father again, demanding the full truth about Finch and the abrupt family relocation. His father, now an older, tired version of the precise man Elias remembered, finally broke. Finch hadn't just been a business acquaintance, he had been a partner in an illicit, high-stakes trade dealing in stolen high-tech prototypes. Finch was the brutal, calculating face of the operation. Elias' father was the reluctant but skilled technician. When Elias' father attempted to leave the life, he stole the schematics for one last, highly valuable piece of technology. A system his father only cryptically referred to as the key, to ensure his family's safety and to destroy Finch's leverage. The man outside the window wasn't a threat of revenge, he was a claim staked. Elias' life was the collateral. Armed with this terrifying new context, Elias' nightmares shifted. The disassociation returned, but now he was no longer a floating observer. He was standing on the outside of his current apartment window, looking in at his own sleeping body. He was the sentinel, watching himself, but the environment was wrong. The furniture was a twisted, funhouse version of his real room, and the air hummed with a low, oppressive frequency. In this new, more interactive state, the countdown clock reappeared, but it was closer, now a wrist-mounted device on his detached, dream self. 3 hours. Then, a voice, soft, conversational, and infinitely malicious, spoke directly behind him. Always the technician's son. Always watching the clock. Aren't you, Elias? Elias couldn't turn around, but he saw the reflection in the glass, Art Finch. Silver hair, the scar of fresh, violent red against his temple. But the most horrifying detail was what Finch was holding. A small, dark object that seemed to absorb all light. A device that looked exactly like the one Elias had only seen in blurred schematics left by his father. The key. Finch didn't scratch at the glass this time. He pressed his hand against it, and the barrier, the window, the boundary between the inner and outer world, began to flex, the glass groaning under impossible pressure. Elias was thrust awake by the sound of glass breaking. He sat up, heart hammering, but the sound was distant, muffled, and wrong. He checked his phone, 2:37 a.m. The time was off. The physical breach was early. He scrambled out of bed, grabbing the heavy metal flashlight he kept nearby. His mind raced, calculating. The time differential meant the threat was less immediate, but more intentional. Finch wasn't performing a routine scare. He was actively tracking Elias and closing in. Elias rushed to the window and peered out. Nothing. The street was silent. The glass breaking sound, where had it come from? He raced through his apartment, checking every door and window. Everything was locked. He was about to dismiss it as a psychological echo when he noticed a tiny, almost imperceptible detail near the main entry door. A sliver of white powder on the dark hardwood floor next to the frame. Plaster dust. Someone had been trying to pry the door off its hinges, or had been using some kind of intense, localized force against the frame, causing the wall material to crack. The sound he heard in his sleep wasn't a warning of an imminent breach, it was a warning that the attempt had just failed. His conscious mind took over, calm and tactical. Finch hadn't gotten in, but he was here, in the neighborhood. Elias had to move. He called Olivia, his voice tight. I need you to listen to me, and you can't ask questions. Art Finch is here. I know that name means nothing, but he's here. I'm coming to your house. I need you to pack a small bag, just essentials, and wait for me in your car, parked 3 blocks away, in the church lot. Now, Olivia, used to Elias' eccentric paranoia but alarmed by the absolute lack of hesitation in his voice, complied immediately. Elias made the journey to Olivia's house a blur of panic and tactical thinking, moving through back alleys, avoiding main roads. When he arrived, she was waiting exactly where he asked, her face pale. What's going on, Elias? That man, Finch, is he really? He's looking for something my dad stole from him. Something called the key. It's what he needs to finalize his work. It's why he's fixated on me. He thinks my dad gave it to me, or the schematics. Elias pulled her close, his eyes scanning the quiet, tree-lined street. He breached the threshold tonight. Not just a dream, but a real attempt to break in. The time shift means he's desperate and erratic. They drove. The destination was not arbitrary. Elias needed a place with high security and, more importantly, a place with constant, unpredictable activity. A place where a silent, precise hunter like Finch would struggle to operate. He chose the busiest, most garishly neon-lit hotel in the city center, checking in under a fake name, Elias Vance, now fully embracing his role as a fugitive. As they settled into the sterile, high-rise room, Elias' phone buzzed with an email. It was from his father's old anonymous email account, received moments after his father's last message years ago. It contained a single, small, heavily encrypted file and a single line of text. If the countdown starts again, find the original source. The key is a distraction. The clock is the weapon. Elias looked at the file, then out the window at the cityscape. The lights a chaotic, dazzling distraction. He knew what he had to do. He had to stop running from Finch and start hunting for the true meaning of the 3 hours countdown. The answer, his father implied, wasn't in the object Finch was seeking, but in the recurring, terrifying time itself. He had to reverse engineer the waking threshold and find the original source of the clock. Part 3. The Point of Origin. Hiding within the garish opulence of the high-rise hotel, Elias Vance finally decrypted the file his father had sent. It wasn't schematics for the key, the physical device Art Finch was hunting, but a series of location coordinates overlaid with highly complex temporal mathematics. His father's warning echoed in Elias' mind. The key is a distraction. The clock is the weapon. Find the original source. The key, Elias realized, was simply a highly sophisticated resonator, a tool. But the clock, the recurring, static 3 hours that had dominated his subconscious since childhood, was the frequency. It represented the exact temporal signature of an experiment his father, a brilliant but reckless temporal physicist, and Finch, the financier and enforcer, had conducted years ago. They hadn't developed a time machine. They had accidentally created a permanent tear in the local chronology at a specific point in space and time. This tear, they believed, allowed for limited precognitive signal leakage, a form of low-level temporal intrusion. The coordinates pointed to a derelict, unmarked research facility located deep within a closed-down industrial park, the place Elias' father had worked before his escape. This facility, not the key, was the true, original source of the temporal breach and therefore the source of Elias' waking threshold. He won't stop until he gets the key back, Elias explained to Olivia, tracing the coordinates on a printed map. But if he gets the key to the source, to the facility, he can amplify that temporal leak. He won't just know what's coming. He could potentially control the local flow of information. He could silence anyone, eliminate any unforeseen resistance. He's turning my defense mechanism into his weapon. Olivia, now fully integrated into Elias' terrifying reality, didn't flinch. So we go to the source first. If the clock is the weapon, we need to smash the clock face. Their journey was fraught with paranoia. Elias saw Finch everywhere, in the reflection of car windows, the silhouette of strangers. The constant strain left him exhausted, yet terrified to sleep. He was running on the ragged edge of consciousness, knowing that sleep meant activation of the threshold, and activation meant Finch was near. They reached the facility just before midnight. It was a massive, concrete bunker, silent and heavy, surrounded by a razor wire fence. Elias managed to bypass the obsolete security measures, relying on the knowledge gleaned from the encrypted files. Inside, the air was cold and dead. The central laboratory was a cavern of rusted metal and deactivated machinery, dominated by a single, terrifying apparatus, a large, circular chamber of blackened quartz and called copper, sitting in the center of the room. Beneath it, affixed to a power conduit, was a crude, jury-rigged digital timer. It glowed a faint, malevolent red. Elias approached it with a sense of fatal familiarity, his hand shaking as he read the display. It was the physical manifestation of his childhood nightmare. 2 hours 30 minutes. The countdown had begun. Finch had found the source and activated the primary system. This wasn't a dream signal. This was the real-world ticking timer counting down to the maximum temporal alignment, 3 a.m., when the energy flux would peak, allowing the most powerful use of the technology. "This is it," Elias murmured. The clock. As he worked frantically to disconnect the power, using his father's notes to find the override sequence, a voice sliced through the silence of the lab. Looking for an off switch, Elias. Art Finch stepped out from the shadows. His silver hair gleamed under the emergency lights. He wasn't holding the key. He was holding a small, pressurized device, a non-lethal weapon, and he looked utterly, chillingly calm. "You're too late, boy," Finch said, approaching slowly. "Your father was smart. He knew the key, the resonator, was useless without the source. But he didn't realize the source was useless without the power. I just need 3 more minutes of charge, and you're going to be sound asleep when the moment hits." Finch raised the device and fired. A dense, chemical cloud enveloped Elias. It wasn't poison, but a fast-acting neurological agent, a customized sleep gas designed to bypass the body's natural panic response. Elias stumbled, his vision tunneling. He tried to fight it, but the sudden, paralyzing fatigue was overwhelming. He collapsed, faintly hearing Olivia cry out before she, too, was overcome. Elias plunged into the deepest, darkest sleep he had ever known. But the waking threshold was not a mechanism of consciousness. It was a function of survival. Even in the drug-induced coma, his mind fought back. He found himself in the familiar space, floating above his body. But this time, he was floating above himself in the lab. Art Finch was moving around the quartz chamber, inserting a small crystalline piece into the primary console. The key. Elias was trapped in the dissociation, powerless. The digital clock on the wall now read 2 hours 59 minutes and 15 seconds. The whispers began, but they were different. They weren't taunts, they were raw data, the temporal leakage itself. They spoke in strings of binary, fragments of future headlines, and, most terrifyingly, they revealed Finch's final plan. A total system shutdown of a major financial district timed precisely to the 3 a.m. peak, creating chaos from which he could disappear forever, making millions. Finch, looking up at the floating consciousness he could sense but not see, smiled. "I waited years for this, Elias. And now, you get a front row seat to the future." The fear was so overwhelming it transcended paralysis. Elias' subconscious, facing annihilation, executed a final, desperate maneuver. It initiated a somatic threshold breach. He focused on the one detail his body could still process: the faint, rhythmic vibration emanating from the black quartz chamber, the actual temporal energy flux. In the dream state, Elias reached out and touched the vibrating wall. The energy didn't harm his consciousness. It grounded it. He felt the cold, hard reality of the quartz in his dream hand, fusing his dissociated awareness back to his physical form. 2 hours 59 minutes and 50 seconds. In the lab, Elias' fingers twitched. Finch was preoccupied with the final calibration of the key. In the dream, Elias didn't try to move his body. He channeled the raw information of the future, the electrical schematics of the console he had glimpsed from his father's files, through his mind, focusing it on the deepest part of his temporal lobe, overriding the drug. 2 hours 59 minutes and 57 seconds. Elias' eyes snapped open. The drug hatch was still thick, but the connection was made. He was awake, but he was operating entirely within the 3-second waking threshold window. Finch heard the small, ragged gasp and spun around, A triumphant sneer fading to fury. Impossible. 2 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. Elias, moving with the preternatural speed and precision only afforded by his temporal warning system, didn't stand up. He used his last ounce of conscious strength, rolling sideways and kicking out his foot, not at Finch, but at the power conduit beneath the digital clock. The kick wasn't aimed at the conduit itself, but at the specific, weak and weld joint he had seen in his father's schematics. The weak point shattered. 3 hours. The countdown hit 0. Instead of the massive power surge Finch expected, the entire laboratory plunged into darkness. The clock, the primary power for the temporal engine, was gone. The quartz chamber went inert, and the faint energy hum died instantly. The temporal breach was sealed. Finch let out a scream of pure, frustrated rage. He rushed Elias. But the waking threshold, its purpose fulfilled, released its hold. Elias was exhausted, the drug pulling him back into unconsciousness. The fight was over, brief and brutal, fought mostly in the dark. Elias woke hours later, head throbbing, lying next to Olivia, who was coughing but otherwise unharmed. Finch was gone, having slipped away in the dark. But the key and the primary console were smashed, the quartz chamber reduced to rubble. Elias knew Finch would be back. He was the sentinel who had defeated the hunter. But the scar on Finch's face was a permanent warning, and the knowledge of the threshold was now an indelible part of Elias' being. In the years that followed, Elias and Olivia built a life, one characterized by constant vigilance. Elias never entirely shook the dread, but he learned to manage it. He continued to log the quiet moments of temporal bleed, the odd acoustic